Our gospel reading for today comes from the second chapter of John, where Jesus and his disciples are at a wedding in Cana, and Jesus shows that he gives far more than we ask. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now, draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the gospel of the Lord. Thank you very much, Eric. So yes, our message comes very much from that wedding in Cana. Fascinating passage, a lot of these 11 verses. And I want to focus specifically on the words of this master of the feast. This is going to be verse 10. This is the master of the feast talking to the bridegroom. He says, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be ever pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen. So this is a fascinating passage. We're going to find a consistent theme here, and you'll see it's actually the title of this message. It's more than we ask, that Jesus does far more than we ask, and we're going to see that in 3 aspects of our message here. And to do that, I'm actually going to put our AV guy to work just a little bit. He's going to take us to the beginning of the gospel text. So I'll ask if John can just jump us to the very beginning of the gospel text. And, one thing to keep in mind, I love preaching sermons, and I think it's also a good opportunity when you get to hear from someone else when they get to preach too. And next week, you will have that opportunity with Pastor Terry Nauman as he's going to be filling in. I know he's helped out here during the vacancy, and he is so excited to come back and share the message with you next week. But in the meantime, for this upcoming week, if you do have pastoral needs, please call the main office of Our Savior's Way in Ashburn, as Pastor John Scott will be on call for me. So with that, here's how our passage starts. We're going to track through this in a verse-by-verse way. It says, "On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples." So it begins by saying on the third day, real simple. It's because in this, up through John in this section, each new section begins with the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day. Here we get on the third day. Well, 2 days prior, because the third day is inclusive, the 2 days prior, Nathanael was called to be a disciple. So this is right after Jesus is calling his disciples, or maybe even in the middle of it. We actually don't know how many disciples were at this wedding at this point. Some commentators think it's 6. Some think more. Could have been all 12. We don't fully know. But what we do know is that Mary was invited to this wedding. Jesus was invited because, familial relationship. This is a very family-oriented culture. And then you got a bunch of plus ones, all these disciples. So anyways, I don't know how that all worked out. But they were all there. So let's go on to verse 3. Verse 3, and John can jump ahead once I read a little past this. This is verses 3 and, verses 3 and 4. "When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, 'They have no wine.' And Jesus said to her, 'Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come.'" Okay, John, you can take that back a slide. So notice what John focuses on here, and I'm talking about, of course, the writer John, who's one of the disciples likely at this wedding. He could have talked about many other things. So for those of you that have planned a wedding, or maybe you've planned, your daughter's wedding, for those of you who've had a daughter, your son's, was alcohol the most important thing? Oh, okay. Now I know where our priorities are. But it's not, isn't it? There's so many other things you got to worry about. That wine is just one of the extra things that, yes, it needs to be there and it's good to have, but that's not what you're thinking about. And yet, John focuses on the alcohol. He focuses on the wine. Here's why that matters in this culture. This is an honor-shame culture, which is still very prevalent in Asian countries and in the Middle East to this day. And in this culture, weddings weren't just half a day. They were 7 days. I am not kidding. The whole community would turn out, and for much of it, the bride and the groom weren't even there, which is fascinating. That's another story. In this instance, they are here for this part of the ceremony. But the thing is, in this culture, when you cannot provide for your guests, that is considered shameful. So if you can't provide wine, your honor is taken away, and it's kind of a bad, I don't want to say omen, but it's kind of a bad look for your marriage and for your family, and that the community can't trust you with these things. Because remember, this is very communal. It's an honor-shame culture. The wine is running out. And Mary, who probably knows these people, that's my guess because she was invited, Mary cared about their honor. She wants this new couple to be blessed. She doesn't want them to be shamed by the community. So she goes to Jesus. Hey, son, they have no wine. Now here's the thing about this. We don't fully know Mary's understanding of her son yet at this point. We don't fully know if she understood him to be God incarnate yet. We're not fully sure she's wrapped her mind around that. But she heard, the song of Elizabeth, her sister. She's heard the song of Simeon. She's heard from the angel. She's heard all these things, words that she has treasured up in her heart. So she knows there's something special about Jesus. She also, was defied by Jesus whenever she spent 3 days looking for him in Jerusalem. We talked about that a few weeks ago. But she knows there's something special about him. And whether or not she knows that he can make wine appear out of a miracle or just have the right connections or do something to make it happen, she says, Jesus, you can do this. Just get them more wine. I don't care what kind it is, even if it's $3 chuck from Trader Joe's. Just get them something. So look at Jesus' response, and you can go to the next slide, John. Let me tell you, if I ever talked to my mother this way, I would be in a lot of trouble. Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. All right, so first to note here, this is not the first time Jesus responds to someone that he loves with the word woman, even his mother. He uses those same words with the woman who touches the fringes of his garment, whom he has compassion on. He uses the same words with Mary Magdalene whenever he first sees her at the tomb. Woman, who are you looking for? This isn't meant to be a mean statement. It's not meant to be taken in that way. Instead, in this instance, Jesus is not calling his mother mother. In this instance, he's trying to show who he is to his mom. Because if anyone's going to say that to their mother, it has to be God. I'm sorry, it has to be. So what does this have to do with me? Changing water or, figuring wine out? My hour has not yet come. So that statement's a little cryptic, but we're going to get back to that statement because it's all going to connect in the end. So we're going to go forward now. But before we do, something that's very important here in this message, I want to point out just with verses 3 and 4. Mary is asking Jesus to do something. She wants to protect the honor of this couple. She doesn't care if it's, I'm joking, $3 chuck from Trader Joe's. Just get them something. But what she doesn't realize is that Jesus is going to deliver far better than what she asks. She doesn't realize he's going to give more than what's expected, than what she's expecting. And I can't speak for you, but there are times where I have prayed things and Jesus has given me far better than I asked, and I'm even praying for good things. Now, I can't speak for the ladies in there, but guys, before you met your wife or, and the person you're engaged to, how we always had those lists, whether they were physical or mental, of what we were looking for in a wife or, in a girlfriend. And, I had that list for myself. I certainly did. And of course, I'm praying that this list, that I can get someone on this list, that ticks all those boxes. And, God told me no. Instead, he gave me Bridget. Yeah, I know. Yeah, that sounds great, doesn't it? She's giving me this great face right now. You all can't see it. But the point is, almost. The point is, when I met Bridget, I realized that list didn't matter, that I was settling for less than what God wanted to give me. See, it ended well. I wasn't going to throw her under the bus. But that's the truth. God wanted to give me more than what I was asking for. And that is what he was about to do with Mary. So one takeaway, God gives us more than we ask for. So instead of praying for less, we should be praying for more, believing he's capable of all things. Next section, verse 5. His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. Now, when you look at this section here, I find that fascinating. After saying that response to your mom, you'd almost expect a rebuke. But look how she responds. She goes to servants who are probably running the party, doing all the behind-the-scenes stuff nobody sees, and she's saying, "Do whatever my son tells you to do." So she knows that there's something special about her son. She knows that he's connected to God, and and whatever he's going to do, whatever that looks like, is going to deliver, because that's the only person they can trust right now. And I love the reversal here, because you go back to Luke's account where he's talking about 12-year-old Jesus, and mom and dad are just indignant at him. I mean, think about it. 3 days through Jerusalem looking for him, where it's a crowded city because of the festival going on. Yeah, I'd be pretty indignant with my kid too. But now the roles have changed. She recognizes that her son is the authority and not her. That there's something special about him, that he is God or connected to God, and he has the authority and we can trust him. But then Jesus, to make his miracle happen, uses the servants. Specifically goes to the servants, and he gives them really simple instructions. You find these big, giant jars, 20 to 30 gallons, it says. These for rites of purification. Jesus says, fills them with water. Okay, so they fill it with water. Very simple. And then he wants them to draw water out and take it to the master of the feast. Usually there was like an MC who ran the show and made sure everything happened. A little more than just an MC though. But these were really simple instructions, but they didn't realize how God was going to profoundly work through those simple instructions. Very profoundly. And it reminds me of a story we've been reading in our young adult group. It's from this book we're doing called Daniel Dilemma. The author is Chris Hodges. And Chris gives a great example of this, of how God works a lot more just through our simple obedience. It's a crazy story, actually. So Chris Hodges tells a time when he was a lot younger. He grew up a Christian and it seems like he had a pretty strong faith when he was young. He went to LSU. Went a long time ago, and he talked about it in the break room when he was, a student worker. He would sit there and read his Bible, and a lot of his coworkers would mock him for it. They were not Christian. They'd make fun of him reading his Bible, and he was just like, whatever, he was used to it. But then one day, another staff member from a different department walks in, a guy named Muhammad, and Muhammad walks in and sees him reading his Bible and joins in with the other guys making fun of him because they think it's ridiculous. But then he actually walks up to Chris, and he looks at him reading, he says, "Did you know your Bible says that if you get hit, you have to turn the other cheek?" And, Chris looks at him, and I'm paraphrasing it, but he goes, "Yeah, I know." And what does Muhammad do? Smack! Knocks him on the ground. And then Chris gets up. And you would think he would just, attack back. That's what Muhammad was waiting for, retaliation, reporting to HR, I don't know. Just waiting for something. But he gets up, he stands there, and he literally turns the other cheek. He says, "Do it." So what does Muhammad do? Smack! And he's on the ground again, in a lot of pain. But then he gets back up. And he, I'm sure in that moment, felt all the temptation in the world to attack this guy. But he just sat down and went back to reading his Bible. He just simply followed the Lord. Even if it was hard, even though it might be a little costly, he turned the other cheek. And Muhammad saw this. And he looked at Chris and said, I have never seen a Christian before who actually did what the book said. And he made a new friend that day. And he started teaching Muhammad about the Bible so he could learn about Jesus. Through a small act of obedience, even though it was hard, Muhammad came to know about Christ. Because God does far more through those little actions. When he calls us to obedience, even when it seems hard, the Lord calls us to be faithful. And he works amazing things that you and I don't always see. Hopefully it doesn't involve getting hit on both sides of your face. But let's look a little bit ahead here. Next section. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, this is verse 9. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants knew where it had come from, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. All right, so why give the good wine first and, not the bad wine? Well, it's real simple. Our taste buds tend to do better the less alcohol we have in us, and we can enjoy the flavor more. And, well, I don't think I have to explain that too much. It's very logical. But here, that is what the expectation was. You can save money that way. But the master of feast, who's probably done many of these things before, I don't know, maybe he's a professional, a party planner. He couldn't believe that a couple would leave the best for last. That was just, out of this world for them in that culture. And it is so much so that he called the groom. Of course, the title here is bridegroom, but it means groom. That, hey, I just want to tell you, this is amazing. And what I love here is I'm not sure the groom actually knew that the wine ran out. I actually don't know, because there are many people running behind the scenes here. Maybe he did know. And let's assume he knew. If he knew, he would have probably been freaking out, because he knew he was about to lose his honor, and so was his wife. But yet, not only was it remedied, it was better. And so here, Jesus, against the couple knowing, or without the couple knowing, blesses and honors this marriage. He blesses and honors it. And how telling that is, because God blesses all marriages. He holds them in high esteem. He honors them because you know what? It's his own design. Genesis 2, verse 24, let a man shall leave his mother and father and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. How could Jesus not honor that? And how much does he therefore call us to honor that with each other? And I say this knowing full well that some of us come from broken situations. I get that. But how much more do we have an opportunity to honor it going forward? And Jesus, when he creates something by design, he intends to help take care of it. He intends to help honor it and make it more like in his, as Paul shows us in Ephesians 5, the marriage between Christ and his church, Jesus being the groom, and we as his church being the bride, preparing and adorning us, because he's married himself to us, and one day he's going to take us away, and we're going to be in his kingdom forever. It's profound. It's a mystery. Paul calls it that. It's something beautiful. And I got to tell you, this brings me to my last point about the water and wine. So did you notice what was used for those jugs? Those giant things that they put the water in. It was special jars for Jewish purification rites. And if you look at Old Testament law and purification stuff, you'll find that there's a need to keep things very clean, very pure, very tidy, because this is for ceremonial cleanliness. If you want to go into the temple, if you want to perform rites, if you want to go to the feast, you have to be ceremonially clean, and that's what these jugs help do. About 20 to 30 gallons of stone. You know how heavy those things are? Jesus says, fill them up. Now, of course, the servants are doing what they're doing. They probably didn't know it was going to turn into wine. They eventually figured it out after they saw it, but why would Jesus do that? Because I feel like dumping wine in there would defile those jars. Seriously, it would defile them. It's almost like we joke in my in-laws' house, there are certain mug, to-go cups that are designated for tea, because if you put coffee in them, the coffee smell never comes out of them. It has a specific purpose. I've not tested that theory, and I won't, because I value my in-laws, and they value me. But the thing is, what does that tell us about purification? It shows that it's not through water that we are made right with God. It's through blood. His blood. Wine. Jesus holds that wine glass, or rather that chalice at his Last Supper. Says, "This is my blood shed for you for the forgiveness of all your sins." And yet, the way we enter into that purification, into that right relationship, is actually through water. Baptism. Because when we enter into that, we talked about this last week, when we enter into that, we are washed by his blood and made right. So I ask you, we look at ourselves. Jesus goes out of his way for Mary. He does more than she asks. He does greater things through the simple acts of servants, and yet he honors a couple without them even knowing it. How much is Jesus doing for you? Probably more than you realize. And so I'll tell you, don't be afraid to ask him for good things, because he's more than capable of it. Don't be afraid to ask for healing, in between, bad relationships. Don't be afraid to ask him for healing in a marriage. Don't be afraid to ask him when you're someone whom you love, who's wandered from the faith, because he is capable of all things. He can do it. And even though we mess up, don't forget how we were washed. You were made clean too, and you are part of his family. That doesn't go away because you belong to him. And there is more in store for you than I think any of us even realize. Amen.